Used Panameras can be insanely expensive to own, as repair costs can ramp up quickly. However, Panameras have been around for a long time, and now that the new one is introduced, older generations might be hitting that magical sweet spot where depreciation levels out. Could this offset some of those high running and repair costs? Welcome to the Panamera market update. We'll cover the latest developments in the price trends and compare them to the rest of the market to figure out if depreciation rates flatlined. Let's start with the most recent cars. Over here we have the base and S models, split by the 2- and 4-wheel driven trims. We can see that prices up to the pandemic price top were relatively stable, but alas for owners, they started to plummet in the summer of 2022 along with the rest of the market. Prices are still falling. Base models, so the 2- and 4-wheel driven variants combined, lost on average 15.5% during last year, and this amounts to $9,800. 4Ss are down by 15% or $10,800. Now there are a few things we need to keep in mind when we talk about these numbers. First, it's important to note that this graph excludes the hybrid and the executive variant. Those markets are much smaller than the ones that you see over here. Second, the displayed numbers are averages. Your car might have lost less or more given the age or mileage, or simply by chance. Third, only clean titles are included. Now splitting the price trend by model year, for example, we can see that the oldest cars lost only 14%, while this was 16% or $16,500 for a 2020 car. Especially for the oldest cars, we can see a slowing depreciation rate. You probably need to sort out some warranty, but let's keep an eye on this trend. On a general level though, the trend is down. Now this video would become incredibly long if we would focus on all the details for the different generations and models. So in the rest of the video we'll focus on the averages only. I'll only mention the detailed breakdowns if there's something interesting to share. We'll continue now with the performance models. Over here we have the price trend split by the Turbo S, Turbo and GTSs. The graph shows something interesting. We can see that prices initially declined relatively quickly after the pandemic market top, but have been decreasing slower since the beginning of 2023. A pattern that isn't uncommon. Now compared to last year, turbos are down by 18.4% and GTSs by 12.9%. Underlying to these numbers, I saw that especially GTSs are discounted less and that they've been selling a bit quicker than the turbos, so keep an eye on them. Now when it comes to the Turbo S's, we can see that the uncertainty in the trend is relatively large. This results from the small market, so I recommend to use the numbers of the normal turbo market as a proxy. So we saw now that the 971 generation is still depreciating. There are some signs of slowing rates, but definitely no bottoms. In monetary terms, we're still talking about significant sums. Things could be different in the 970 generation. These cars are a few years older, increasing our chances of finding bottomed out trends. We start with the facelifted versions, and while I don't think they are as good looking as the 971s, I believe they're a big step up from the pre-facelift version. There's hardly a price difference between the 2- and 4-wheel driven variants of the base model, so I grouped them together over here. This reveals that prices are still falling quickly. In fact, extremely quickly. We're looking at a drop of 23.1% or $9,000 during last year. This absolute drop is on par with the 971 generation. The depreciation rate is then also high. Even if we remove the effect of mileage on the price, we're looking at a drop of 18%. The cause for this lies in the 2015 and 2016 models. They lost approximately 29%. If we move on to the S models, we can see that the confidence intervals are relatively large. These cars are becoming rare, hereby increasing the price uncertainty. The 4-wheel driven variants are down by 9.1% and the 2-wheel driven ones by 15.9%. However, the change in the 4S isn't statistically confirmed, so I think it's appropriate to use the rate of the 2-wheel driven variant as a proxy. Continuing with the turbos and GTSs, we can see a familiar pattern. Flat or slightly increasing prices till the summer of 2022, followed by a decline. GTSs lost 18.4% during last year and turbos 18.1%. These rates amount to $10,600 and $11,700 respectively. There's no bottom in sight here. And that brings us to the oldest cars. The first generation pre-facelift models stretch from 2010 to 2013, and the examples which you probably should avoid already start at $11,000. Surely we can find some low depreciation rates in this market. Now, because these are so old, the premiums between the base and S models basically disappeared. This is a common phenomenon in the Porsche lineup. Looking at the plot, we can see that the price trend is the same as in the rest of the Panamera market. Prices have been falling since July 2022, but the current depreciation rate is slightly lower than in the previous graphs. Base models lost 14.4% and S's 13.1%. There's hardly any difference between the model years. Moving on to the turbos and GTS's, we can see that turbos are down by an average of 6.7%, and that is 10.1% for the GTS's. On a standalone basis, these rates are clearly the lowest ones we've seen so far. Moreover, have a look at the trend of the turbo. We can see that for the first time, prices were basically stable. Let's inspect this a little bit closer. If we look at the price development broken down by the different mileage categories, we can see that in all but the second lowest category, prices increased during the last 6 months. Of course, the uncertainty in these trends is high, as they're made up by 4 to 10 cars each. Therefore, I wouldn't go as far as to say that these are bottomed, but out of all the models that we saw, this model appears to be the closest. Alright, we saw a lot of numbers, so let's start to aggregate them and deduce some conclusions. Over here we have all the depreciation rates that we just saw. And this shows that Panameras lost on average 15.1% and that bottoming price trends are mostly still far away. Looking at the numbers, we can see that the differences across the generations are relatively small. At least much smaller than I initially thought. The 971s lost 15.1%, the facelifted 970s 18.9%, and the pre-facelift versions 11%. It's a surprise to me that the 970 facelift models are still depreciating so quickly. Especially the result of the base model really sticks out. I double checked these numbers and they appear to be right. Moreover, there are enough cars on the market to make this a reliable estimate. So please comment below if you have any thoughts on this. Now, when it comes to the price behavior, we can see that bottoming trends are still very much an illusion. We saw some indications of it in the 970 pre-facelift turbo market, but it's not happening across the board. Now, if you're someone who likes to gamble, you could buy one of these and maybe make a little bit of money when you sell it. But I think it's optimistic to expect that you'll end up in the green after maintenance and running costs. There's however also a bit of good news. Let me show you. Over here we have the US year-over-year price changes for almost all cars that feature on my channel. On the horizontal axis we have the price change compared to last year in percentages. And on the vertical axis we have the number of cars to which this change applies. The average decrease during last year was 8%, and most cars lost between 13 and 3%. So this means that the average per Panamera generation falls above the market average. For the oldest cars, this is a bad result, as you expect them to lose less. For the newer ones though, it's reasonable to expect that they fall on the left-hand side of the average. Yet, the market rate for the 971s only just falls in the top 25% of cars that lost the least. This is a decent result for a high-end luxury vehicle, especially compared to the Taycans. They lost between 22 and 26% depending on the model you look at. You can click over here if you want to see the full market analysis for the Taycans. Let's now wrap up and conclude. Should you buy a used Panamera? If you are doing it with the idea to dodge depreciation, definitely not. We saw that all generations are still depreciating quickly and that the difference between the generations isn't that large. The latest generation drops a bit quicker than the oldest cars, but this is to be expected. The facelifted 970s though are still dropping at similar rates. This is higher than expected. Only the very first cars are dropping at lower rates, but also they are still losing more than the market average. It are only the turbo models for these older cars that show some signs of bottoming. But there's some uncertainty in the numbers, so you need to take a little gamble if you want to buy this purely from a value perspective. Potentially, this could offset some of the total cost of ownership, but I think it's unlikely you would come out with a net positive after the other running and maintenance costs. Now if that's something that matters, only you can decide. Now if you like this data-driven way of analyzing car markets but would like to see a video for a different car, head over to my channel. Over there you'll find data-driven market updates for a large variety of cars. Can't find the car you're looking for? Let me know the name of the car by commenting it down below in the comment section. Once there are enough requests for a certain car, I'll make a video about it. As always, thank you for watching and I hope to see you next week for a new video.